Yo guys, this week the topic is test mode, the new test mode in Meteor 1.3. And I know a lot of you are stoked about this interview, but it's because testing hasn't been the best story so far in Meteor. It kind of magnifies it by the fact that there was never an official answer on what happened with the abandonment of velocity. So today is a big day. We dive into it with Tom and Sashko. We get the answers that you guys want, and we get into what's coming in 1.3, which is really amazing. Welcome to transmission number 9.
Receiving incoming transmission.
Incoming transmission.
Incoming transmission.
I'm sure you have many questions.
Transmission.
Today we're talking about Meteor 1.3 and the new test runner. Today I have with me Sashko Stabilo and the amazing Tom Coleman from Australia. Good day, mate.
Hey, Ben. How's it going? Good day.
That's going to be my only, stupidness.
That remains to be seen.
Okay, so this is, pretty exciting. Meteor testing. Meteor 1.3 is coming with official test support. And this has been a long time coming. And just, off the bat, my first question is, why now? Why did you guys decide to introduce official testing support now, version 1.3?
Yeah, well, I guess, two reasons. One was we were looking at the guide article on testing. So we were going to write a guide article, and we could have written a guide article in 1.2 on testing. Sashko and I certainly talked about what would be in it. And, it would have focused on testing packages and using velocity to test your whole app.
Right.
And maybe using some end-to-end stuff. So we had an idea of what would be in there. And, the story on testing using packages to do unit tests was kind of crappy, but that's what people were doing. That's what we were doing for unit tests. And, it was better than nothing. And I guess a lot of people didn't know about it, still don't know about it maybe. So it was going to be a useful guide article. But then, of course, 1.3 started popping up, and all of a sudden in 1.3, we don't really want people to be using packages anymore. Not at all, but for sort of app code. There's really no need to use it, for instance, to control file load order, which was one of the main reasons people were using them. And so, we were sort of looking at that thinking, well, we really need to have a testing story for the guide article to make sense for modules. Otherwise, we can't, in the rest of the guide, be use modules, guys. You should be using modules, which is what we wanted to do. How could we do that if there's no testing story? And Velocity doesn't have a testing story for modules because it's not out yet. How could it?
Right.
So that was sort of one big reason. Then, and of course, the announcement that the Velocity team made that they were sort of handing it back to us kind of happened at that same sort of time. And I think we'd already started on the testing stuff. In fact, that may have been one of the reasons why they were announcing it. But yeah, all those things kind of happened at a similar time. And it really, it just meant we had to do it. And look, to be honest, it was way overdue.
Yeah. I think that's more of what I'm curious about. When I say why now, I'm wondering why has it taken this long?
Yeah, I mean, I can't really speak to it, why it's taken so long. I think
I know you're the newcomer, right?
Well, I've been sitting there thinking, God, I wish I had this for a long time. I think maybe there was a perception that things were good enough, or that you could sort of muddle through, and I guess you sort of could. You could use package testing velocity, and it was really not great, but. It was not ideal, but it worked, and people were testing their apps. But I think one of the purposes of the guide and one of the stated goals of the guide is to sort of point out the areas of the framework where the guide article kind of looks crap, and it's oh, you've got to do all these weird things, make packages in your app just so you can test them. And I think it serves its purpose there. It really highlighted that this problem needed to be solved.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think there's kind of another perspective on it, which is, from somebody who's been around for longer, Meteor and saw this from the inside, was that it's hard to focus on stuff like this if it's not part of the kind of critical path for developers. So, we had some example apps for Meteor, like we had to-dos and we had some of the tutorials. And kind of from the perspective of testing, if that stuff is not in the to-dos tutorial or example app, there's almost no point in making it super smooth. So I think one of the biggest achievements of the guide was making that Meteor official materials now have to list this stuff. And so that makes us really feel bad if it's not a great experience, because, we could hide behind the fact that, all of our official stuff is a great experience. And then there's some community packages, whatever. But now that, the Meteor guide is taking all of that stuff and making it part of the official story, that's when we realized there's a lot of things we have to clean up. And I think testing is not the only one. There's going to be other stuff like how to use CSS post processors, how to use NPM packages, stuff like that, where the Meteor guide really does a good job of putting some of those issues at the forefront, where before they were kind of invisible. You had to really dig through a lot of stuff to figure out that was even really a problem.
That's a really good point. Yeah, and it would just be open air talks about MDG should support this, or there should be a package made for this, and it was all just there was no official documentation of things here or there. The guide is super powerful. The light bulb's just going off now. You can call me delayed or whatnot, but now I understand why you guys are putting such a huge investment into the guide.
Yeah, and I think one of the cool things is, initially we were actually thinking of releasing the guide alongside Meteor 1.3, the first version. And then I think it was in December, we just randomly decided to release it the way it was then. And it still turned out to be a really useful resource. So even the Meteor guide as it is now is kind of half of what we envisioned it to be. And Meteor 1.3 is bringing us much closer to the other half. And then there's still some stuff after that where there's still some things that we want to cover that we're not quite yet covering. So I think it's going to really grow into a really major resource.
Diving into this, 1.3 it's a really big shift for Meteor. It's almost like Meteor is growing up, and I know for myself, and I'm sure other people feel the same. There's a new sense of confidence when I'm proposing Meteor as the platform to use on a certain project, right? Because module support, better support for NPM, and now testing, and that builds developer confidence going forward. So here's the question. So in the past, the message, the core message for Meteor was, Meteor is great for having all this modern functionality in an app, and it's easy to use, and it's really fast to make, fast prototyping almost. And the message was more robust than that, and you guys wanted to offer the best tools and the best experience for developers. But really what came across was that everyone was wow, I can get so much done in such a short amount of time. And there was just this culture that was formed around, hey, Meteor's for fast prototyping. The lack of tests made the outside world take that adoption of that viewpoint as well. And then I've even heard it said oh, Meteor's just for toys, from people from the outside. And I was no, Meteor's so much more. But that goes down to the core now. Now that we do have testing, how are we going to see, how do you guys plan on changing the perspective of people and what they think of Meteor? How are we going to change this culture of fast prototyping to I don't know, what would you call it, a mature professional platform?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think you've really expressed it well there. I think if I was going to sum it up in one sentence, it would be moving from an attitude of fast prototyping to fast everything, right? It should continue to be quick to build stuff even after you have a team of 20. It should be quicker than the alternative. Where, and I don't mean quick in the sense of quick and dirty. I mean just easier, so faster, right? So it should be easier to have a well-maintained app. It should be easier to write a test suite that ensures you don't regress. It should be easier to deploy. It should be, everything should be easier, and that's the whole goal, right?
Right.
So, I mean, your question was about the sort of messaging around that. I'm not sure I can speak too much to the sort of marketing strategy, I suppose, but I hope that like we can get the message across by doing, if you know what I mean. So like having a guide there that says this is how you write a maintainable app
So
in Meteor.
that's good. So like a guide.
Worried about all these like things that maybe you haven't even thought of yet.
Mm-hmm.
So having all these sort of educational materials that aren't just the first video that you watch for 10 minutes that gets you pumped about it, right? Like that's really good for the first bit, but not so good for the later bit.
Right.
And then, we're like really focused on features right now that help make that side of things easier. So that's where the testing comes in. And then I think the final thing is like just aligning better with the general node community, because I think the problem with not being aligned to the general node community is that it makes it really hard to, in some cases, really hard to use sort of random tool X that you might want to use in your app. And the problem with that is that the first, half an hour or prototype of apps probably looks like similar for a lot of different apps. But then as the app gets older and more complicated, like that's where they diverge. And that's where like there's no way that we can like have a in-house solution for every problem. So we need to, embrace the community, and then all of a sudden that issue of like, how do I do X with Meteor goes away, because it's now the question is, how do I do X in Node?
Mm-hmm.
And that's almost someone else's problem, right? If that makes sense.
Yeah, well, exactly. And that is a positive too. Like I think I've said it before, where there's been like the lion's share of responsibility on MDG's shoulders, which is almost like unfair. It was a burden, an unfair burden.
I think we put it on ourselves. I don't think, I don't know if unfair
I didn't say that anyone else put it on. Like you guys put it on, but yeah.
Yeah, there's one more thing I would want to add to that, which is, in terms of messaging, I think one of the things that we've been missing from Meteor's marketing for a long time is we have been hitting that angle a lot, which is like, Meteor is the only thing you need to build your app. You can get started really fast. Everything's well integrated.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing that we haven't advertised almost at all, which is really quite a shame, is the parts where Meteor is actually better than the best of class solution elsewhere.
Yes.
The place where the build tool gives you a better development experience because it comes with like the best source maps out of the box, right?
Yeah.
The part where like, certain parts of the data system are faster and more performant than what you would be able to put together yourself, et cetera. There's like a lot of things where Meteor is not just more well integrated and easier to use, but actually just like ahead of the game. Like for example, the new Cordova integration with the new hot code push stuff in Meteor 1.3 is like a total game changer. It's like, now your app has kind of bulletproof hard code push, built in also with the Galaxy system of versioning and stuff like that. And that's something that I think actually just nobody else has. And it's not about being easy to use. It's like, if you want this feature, Meteor is like the only place you can get it right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not so much like being like, sorry, you just like pegged it. You pegged it because it's not so much like rubbing someone else's nose in the sand or like being an all out boxing match, but like you guys have a product, you guys have a service that you guys are making, and you're making it so that it could be better than anything else because that's what you're passionate about. And like the conversation needs to start with you guys and your marketing, so that when the developers come across Meteor and they love it and they need to sell it to whoever's deciding about this next app, like the conversation got started with Meteor and their marketing team. And that material was able to be carried over.
Yeah, adding another point, tying into the topic of what we were just talking about, with testing, like as far as I know, Meteor 1.3 is going to be the only way to reasonably run tests across the client and the server and have them show up in one window, along with all your unit tests and your integration tests. Like I spent a while trying to write some package tests for an NPM package that would run on the client and the server at the same time. And like, I still don't quite know how to do it properly. Immediately just get that out of the box, like for free.
Yeah. Yeah. There are huge benefits to using Meteor. Yeah. And It almost makes it like a no-brainer, especially for line of business apps. But again, like you have to draw the line. There has to be comparison so that like CTOs, especially like non-technical CTOs, could like be like, oh yeah, this is it. This is what we need to use. So very cool. Very cool. And so like, Tom, you touched a little bit like the guide is going to have tests, talk about tests extensively in it. You touched a little bit saying that your examples will have tests.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? You said to-dos, right?
Yep.
Cool. And so is
and the tutorial, like the simple tutorial that you do on the website, will have the test.
Very cool. Is it going to have both unit and end-to-end?
In the simple tutorial, or in the simple tutorial, I think we'll probably just have one test, like one of the 10 steps will be write a test. The To-Dos app already has end-to-end tests, so you can check that out already if you want to check out that. It's in the master branch, actually. So
very cool. Yeah. So that's already up on 1.3? Is that out?
So there's a separate repo for the To-Dos app now. It's just like GitHub Meteor /To-Dos. And there is, I guess one of each type of test or a few of each type of tests on the master branch of that right now. So if people want to look at what these tests look like, that should give them a pretty good idea.
Very cool. Very cool.
Still some more work to be done, but the basics are there.
We're having official test support now in 1.3, but this isn't the first official test support for Meteor, right? Like the first one was velocity. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, like, well, first off, everyone who's listening knows what happened to velocity. And I'm curious, like from your guys' point of view, like what happened and why is like, now that you guys worked on 1.3 and testing in 1.3, why wasn't that like velocity?
Yeah, I think I can speak to this because I was involved in a lot of the discussions around this stuff back in the day. I remember also meeting with Sam Hatum, in coffee shops and stuff and chatting about it.
Yeah, because he's out in San Francisco too, right?
Yeah, that's right. I see him every once in a while. It's pretty chill. So, so I think basically what happened is, we looked at the question of testing a while ago. Well, it was like a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago even. Mm-hmm. And, at that point, the situation looked very promising. There was, this velocity project that was kind of organizing a couple of members of the community to write some different test runners, integrate them all through like a common runner and a common reporter and stuff like that, which seemed like a really good idea.
It was very exciting. I still remember the Meteor talk. Yeah,
it sounded really, really cool. And so, I think from our point of view, we were like, we weren't going to work on testing for a while from that time. And we were like, that sounds great. Like maybe the only thing they're missing is stamp of approval to say this is the project to use. Mm-hmm. And so we were like, well, that's not hard. That's not hard to give. All we have to do is accept a pull request to add a Meteor test command that runs velocity, and then put the official stamp of approval on it, and we would be good to go. And I think it didn't quite play out that way. In particular, there were, I guess, some things that the velocity team ran into in Meteor Core, which made it a little bit harder to build some of the things they were trying to build in a stable way. In particular, they were interested in being able to build different test versions of the app, run them against different testing frameworks, have those reactively rerun, when your code changes, and then have some of that reporter stuff built into the app. And so I think it just kind of, through a combination of, a lot of complexity in that tool and also, some requirements of things to be merged into core, it kind of got slowed down. So we had a couple of meetings, we got some people in the office and we were talking about it. But at the end of the day, we didn't really have the bandwidth to work on and merge those changes to core that were necessary to make that stuff more efficient. Like I think working with those changes and, aligning them with what we were doing with the rest of the build system at the time, I think from our perspective was a similar amount of work to building some of this testing stuff ourselves.
Okay.
Right. So it's not like we were saving effort by having Velocity kind of offload some of the work of building testing. It ended up being, I think, just as much work as if it was kind of a Meteor core project. And I think
so it came down to like the business of it.
Well, not just the business, but kind of just, if we weren't going to prioritize testing as one of the top things, then that equivalently also deprioritized some of those pull requests, right? And so, I think that's just how it went, which we just didn't have the bandwidth to make the things happen that needed to happen to make Velocity a successful project.
Mm-hmm.
I think personally, I think it was maybe a little bit too ambitious, the things that they were trying to do, because from my point of view, my goal would have been to just do the minimum number of things to make testing feasible and nice to use. And I think that's what we're trying to do in Meteor 1.3.
Yeah.
I think Velocity was invested in making kind of a next generation testing experience,
mm-hmm.
which would blow away all test things that have come before it, and have like the most integrated, the most reactive, just test runner of all time, basically.
Yeah.
Which would be amazing, by the way, if we did that. But
right. And I think the testing in Meteor 1.3 is more like take what exists in the world today and just bring it into Meteor without innovating too much.
Yeah.
And it turned out to be easier.
Yeah.
I think that explained like that makes total sense. Velocity was very ambitious. And if it did come in, it would take up, even like now, if you took it right now, it would take up a lot more man hours than what you guys have implemented. And even going forward then, because it was so ambitious.
Well, that's right.
Yeah. At the end of the day, you got to ask yourself, well, what are we going to be ambitious about? Like you have to be very purposeful on what you're picking to like be known for. And do you guys want to be known as like this amazing test runner, next generation test runner? Or is Meteor's core competencies and what they want to be known for in the community something different? And then you have to like divvy up responsibility and effort according to that mission. So,
yeah, and I think from where we are right now, it's kind of clear, at least to me, that what we should be doing rather than building a next generation test runner, which if we had unlimited resources, I'm sure we could do, and it'd be great, but we don't. Is really making sure that the next generation test runner in JavaScript, wherever it comes from, you can run against Meteor. So whether or not that's something that comes out of Facebook or something that comes out of Google or something that comes out of random place X, we want to make sure that you can use it with Meteor. I think that makes more sense. And
it does, because having a test runner is not your unique selling proposition.
Exactly.
Something else is. And so the goal should be compatibility, really. It makes total sense.
I think that's actually like, if you think of our strategy going forward with stuff, I can in most detail speak to Apollo, for example. I think that's exactly the point, which is if we're building the best data loading system, for example, why would we build the best data loading system only for Meteor if we could build the best data loading system, period? And I think that's the same direction you should come from with testing, right? Like, why build the best testing framework for Meteor if you could build the best testing framework for all of JavaScript? Mm-hmm. And then it's on Meteor to make sure that anything that works with JavaScript works with Meteor as well. And so, Chimp, for example, Sam's new thing, as far as I can tell, just works with basically any app.
Yes.
Right? Mm-hmm. And that makes it also a great tool to use with the Meteor app. And that's awesome because he can get a ton more users and customers and developers and feedback if he's targeting a wider community. And the Meteor developers still get all the benefit of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Before we get off the topic of Velocity, I don't know, I think I want to take this moment to really thank all the work that went into it, because they really did try to push things forward in a revolutionary kind of way. And that takes a ton of effort, and they did it on their own time. So
totally. And the story just would have been terrible for Meteor if we didn't have Velocity until now. I mean, there would have been, package tests would have been it. That would have been a terrible situation. So, they saved our bacon. There's no doubt about it.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All you Velocity team members and contributors, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
And everyone else that's been like building testing products for Meteor as well, which hopefully most will still continue to work. I think almost all will continue to work in 1.3. It's not just Velocity as well, because there's also things like Starry Night and Gagarin, which are kind of outside of the Velocity umbrella, I guess. That are also really great testing tools for Meteor. So.
Yes. Yeah. Some critics will say, okay, MDG put their stamp of approval on Velocity, and then they were like kind of like MIA when Velocity core team left, and you guys explained like the business side of it really well, and it really convinced me. So, and I'm sure everyone else, it's going to make sense to them too. But going forward, with the testing support that is included in 1.3, you guys are fully committed to have this stay from this point forward in Meteor, right? Like there's going to be like no abandoning. I can't tell the future, but basically I'm asking you guys to like publicly state your commitment to like the testing and testing support.
Sure. I mean, it's a command of the Meteor tool now. I think it's not going anywhere.
Good.
Yeah, and there's another way to come at it, I think, which is...
Thank you. I needed that because I worded it totally wrong, man.
Which is, if you think about velocity tests, as far as I know, most of them, if not all, will run very well in the new Meteor test command in Meteor 1.3. You can take your velocity tests, and if you rename the files appropriately and maybe put some lines of code at the top or something like that, they will run fine. So I wouldn't actually... we are certainly, to put it in certain words, like abandoning the code base itself and the test runner itself, but your tests are not being abandoned, right?
That's right.
If you write your tests in Velocity using Mocha, and if you write your tests using Meteor 1.3 using Mocha, I guarantee that whatever the next thing is, maybe it's not exactly the same code base or the same build tool, you'll still be able to run the same tests against the same code using the same syntax as you were able to before.
That's right. I mean, the actual tests themselves that you write shouldn't look that weird to a normal Mocha person. There's Meteor-specific stuff in there, but it's a Mocha test. Mm-hmm. And that's what we want, and that's the direction we want to be moving in every respect.
Very cool. Well, let's get into the details a little bit of test mode then. So
sure.
I'm curious, like in a top-level view, like what is test mode and what is it not?
Yeah, so I think it's probably instructive to start by looking at what Meteor test packages used to do. So you've probably used that before, Ben. And what Meteor test packages does, which made it good for unit testing, was that it took the set of packages that you wanted to test from your app, got rid of your app, basically made a new app with nothing in it except for those packages, and then set up this special test context where it can make calls into the packages and calls into the on test block, essentially. Mm-hmm. The on test block of the packages set up that test mode. And so added a bunch of extra files, which were the test files for those packages. And those test files for those packages then, in a very traditional sense, ran TinyTest tests. The other thing that Meteor test packages did was add what's called a test reporter, or a test driver, maybe more correctly, which in the vanilla TinyTest case was this thing called test in browser, which you've probably seen before, the browser test for Meteor packages. And what test in browser does is basically sets up a way for TinyTest to register themselves. And then when it's run, it starts like a mini Meteor app, which is the test reporter, which is just that screen that you see with the green and the red, test results. When you hit that app, it starts tests in the browser and it tells the server to start tests on the server. And these are all the tests that are registered by those special test files that are added by the packages in the on test block. So I don't know if that was confusing, but that's what Meteor test packages does. And so basically for modules test, we kind of just wanted to do something as close as we could to that, because that already existed, had been around for a while. I guess the other thing I should mention about Meteor test packages is that there was actually in that whole description, there was nothing tying that mode to TinyTest. So although that's what happened by default, it was certainly possible and is possible now in 1.2 to, instead of using the test in browser, which is a core Meteor package which uses TinyTest, instead of using that driver package, you could, for instance, use Practical Meteor Mocha, which the currently published version works like this. If you use it in test package mode, you can write test files which use describe and it, the core Mocha syntax, to register tests with Practical Meteor Mocha. And then Practical Meteor Mocha does the same thing of setting up a little Meteor app, which is the test reporter, showing the results on the screen, running the tests on the client and the server. And the results you see on the screen look like a standard Mocha HTML test result. So different to the TinyTest one. So that is perfectly possible right now as test packages. And so we wanted to make like a unit, like what we call Meteor test, simple test mode. I'm not quite sure what the best nomenclature is. As similar as possible to that. So basically what we needed was the equivalent of the on test block in a package. That on test block in a package is basically just a way for a package to add some extra files in test mode. And so to achieve that, we have this special file naming scheme, which is .tests.star. So you might call a file like todos.test.js. And then in that file, you would add extra code, which runs when you're in test mode. And so what happens by default in test mode is that none of the files in your app are loaded by default, except for those test files. And then those test files can go around and import whatever they like, bring in whatever code from your app they want. And what that means is that when that test reporter package, the test driver package, sets up this little testing app, there's no other app around. Like your app isn't actually loaded in the sort of traditional sense. So your app doesn't have a web server. Your app doesn't register any Blaze templates, etc., unless a test goes and imports that. So what happens in sort of normal testing mode is you might have a test, it might import like one Blaze template, you might render that into a div and then look at the results. Or you might have a collection, your test might import that collection, call some helper on that collection or some method that works with that collection, and that will happen sort of in isolation. So we did call it unit test mode, but we actually changed the name because it's not strictly speaking unit test mode unless you make it unit test mode. So if you want to run a pure unit test in the sort of like testing sense, you need to go and mock stuff out. You're going to have to do that as you would in normal Node. If you require something, if you write a test in Mocha against a pure Node app and you require something, you're still going to need to like mock out its dependencies if you want to properly unit test it. By the same token, suppose you wanted to properly unit test a method in Meteor, you would need to mock out all the various exit points of that method. So you might need to mock out the collection that it calls. You might need to mock out the second method that it calls. The final thing that we've added is what we call full app testing mode, which I don't know, do we want me to tell you about it now, or should we talk a little more about the normal testing mode first? Oh, I can't.
We can't hear you, Ben.
Dude, I'm unmuted. I was muted the whole time. I was saying some amazing stuff too.
You were like, stop talking, Tom. Too much information.
No way. That was great. That was killer. I was trying to follow because there is a lot going on. I think what what really got me on this question, and you were the one to help me formulate this question, Tom, was what is it not? What is 1.3 testing not?
Right. So what it isn't, or what it maybe it shouldn't be used for, I don't think, is sort of like end-to-end or acceptance testing. And I think Velocity did have support for that, but there's really no need, in my mind, for the Meteor tool to help you with acceptance testing, because acceptance testing kind of by definition is an external process kind of poking your Meteor app and seeing what happens when it pokes it. That doesn't really need to be loaded from within your Meteor app. And so maybe we'll get to how you do acceptance and end-to-end testing in Meteor.
I'm super
a little
interested.
later.
Yes.
We can talk about it now. I mean, basically, so in the guide we're going to recommend, I think this is an interesting topic because it comes up like what acceptance testing should be used with Meteor, and the answer is anything, hopefully. In the guide we're going to document how to use Chimp because we need to document something.
Okay.
But there's no reason why you can't use anything else that can poke a web application and deal with WebSockets, I suppose. Because Selenium-based testing tools, they boot up a WebDriver, they boot up a browser, they have this WebDriver interface to like click buttons and inspect things on the screen. And that's kind of perfect. You don't want the Meteor app to know it's being tested. That's kind of like, by definition, what you want in an acceptance test.
Great. So we
like have zero support for acceptance testing in the tool. Like we don't do anything to help you do that.
Well, and what you're saying
that makes sense.
What you're saying is acceptance testing is good. There's just no need for it in the tool, right?
The tool doesn't need to do anything to make it possible. So it's possible in 1.2. It'll be possible in 1.3, basically. Yeah, and we will document like one way to do it. And if people are confused, that should clear it up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's like the main goal of the Meteor guide. Everything's the main goal, but one of the main goals is to make it so that we don't have to write code to help people out, right? Like there's definitely a version of Meteor 2 years ago where we would say, oh man, we better write a bunch of code to make end-to-end testing like built in. Mm-hmm. But now I feel a lot less of that pressure because now we have a set of articles where we can say this is basically built in. We didn't write any code to do this, but you can bet that it's going to work well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's a much more sustainable model going forward as well.
Yep. Yeah, we can very easily accept pull requests to that and be sure that it's not going to break all of Meteor.
Very cool. Very cool. So that's interesting because you guys have, I don't know if it's like just a draft of the guide for 1.3 testing or something like that.
Oh, it's very much a draft. Yeah.
Yeah. And you guys have like an outline at the bottom and you guys were mentioning like, okay, well, what should we do with acceptance testing? What should we do with integration testing? Things like that. Just to clear it up right now. Yep. And it was interesting how you said like end to end, how you described that a little bit. What does so 1.3 supports full app, which is end to end, right?
Well, yeah, I get confused about what the definitions of various terms are.
Okay, well, let's dive into that in a second. And then it also like has unit testing, which, and those are so full app and unit testing. That's what it's going to be right now. And now I'm curious. So like full app, I just thought, okay, that's end to end. But it sounds like I shouldn't define it like that.
Well, yeah, I guess it depends what you mean by end-to-end tests. And maybe I'm just showing my naivety about testing, but usually when I hear end-to-end tests for web applications, I think something that's driven by Selenium, something where the test driver opens a browser, clicks on buttons like directly using that WebDriver interface, that like click on the button with title, waits for some time, checks that something's rendered to the screen, clicks another button, fills in a form, clicks a button, right? Mm-hmm. And that is not what the full app testing is intended for. And the full app testing is intended for, suppose you have like a publication and a method that work together. Okay. So, you know, calling this method should affect this publication. And that's going to have to be something that you test across the wire. You know, you need to like set up the publication, subscribe to the publication on the client, you know, make sure the right data is there on the server, call a method on the client, you know, check that like the data then appears in the publication. To do that, you need like the whole app to be running, or at least, you know, that part of the whole app. So like that's what like the full app test.
Maybe I'm showing my naivety about it all, but isn't that like integration testing then? More?
It is, but it's also possible to do integration testing without needing the app running. So for instance, if I have a method on the server and I call the method and the method calls another method and then like goes to the database and writes and then like calls out to some node module that like calculates MD5 hash or something, you know, that's not a unit test if you're letting all that stuff happen. So originally we did call it unit test mode and integration test mode. Okay. And it's certainly true that everything that you do in a full app test is probably an integration test or in that side of things. But the point was made to us that in our unit test mode, it was perfectly possible to run integration tests. And so we just thought, this is getting really confusing. I'm not sure whether our like, renaming has cleared things up very much.
Yeah, now I'm like kind of, okay, let's dive into right now the differences between full app mode and non mode.
Yes. Okay. Good idea. So the key difference in full app mode is that all the files of your app that would normally be eagerly loaded, so like your main.js or like if your app is still in the old, what's still normal Meteor style where every file is outside of the imports directory, all those files get loaded. And then your test files get loaded. So, you know, your router will get loaded. All your publications will get loaded on the server. All your methods will get loaded on the server. And so when the test starts, you've got like, the test is starting in a browser, in a client, but you've got a server connection that it can like make method calls on. You've got, you know, probably a rendered app on the screen that it can like check something is rendered, but from a JavaScript perspective, you know, like, you know, use jQuery or something to check that something's on the screen. Yeah, so it's, I think it's a kind of unique thing. I don't think most web frameworks really have this mode. It's maybe something that we can do because we're Meteor and we're like a integrated platform.
So because it's like not end to end and it's not going to fire up a separate browser or like Phantom.js or anything like that, like these tests are going to run if you go on your browser and you have to like go to the route itself and then that those tests will run for that like route, or am I?
So
I guess I'm kind of confused.
So so the test driver will like just replace. So the app is still running. The test driver will just hide the app. The app will be there but invisible, and the test driver will just be over the top on every route. And so the app, so the tests are running there, and like maybe the app is routing around, and you have a test, for example, in the To-Dos app, which does route around and checks that the right data is loaded from the various publications. But the view that you see is not like what you would normally see at that route. It's the test results.
Okay.
And to get to the technical details of that a bit, I guess it's kind of a weird hybrid mode. So in Velocity, it didn't quite work like that. In Velocity, when you ran your app, it actually sort of started at least 3 different versions of your app. It started...
Yeah. It had mirrors.
It had your normal app. It had the test reporter running as a separate Meteor app. And then it had the mirrors for the various testing modes that you wanted to run as separate Meteor apps. And I think that was where a lot of the complexity for Velocity came from, in that it was trying to manage all these different Meteor processes at once and communicate between them.
Yeah, big performance.
So, and a big performance hit with the build times. So, that's one thing that we kind of focused on with this sort of minimum viable testing mode, was to try and simplify that. And in some senses, maybe it's made things a little more confusing, but it's certainly simplified the way that the test mode works. It works very similar to the way that test packages worked. It's just a question of what files get loaded, but you just have a single process test mode.
So to elaborate on the difference, I think the way I understand it between the normal test mode, the full app test mode, and end-to-end test mode, which doesn't exist but you bring it yourself, is you could be very careful, and eventually you could write a set of tests for your app that never start a web server and that never run your database. This is technically not the case in Meteor 1.3, but you can totally imagine that in Meteor 1.4 or a future version, you would be able to write a bunch of tests where you don't need to start Mongo. There's no actual network activity happening, nothing like that. And those tests would run blazing fast. They would run in 0.2 of a second or something.
Mm-hmm.
In full app test mode, that's impossible, because in full app test mode, all the initialization code of your app always runs in order to simulate as much as possible the actual set of things that happen when your app is running, right? The web server starts up, your database starts up, database connections are made, collections are made, all your methods are registered, your router is initialized. And so that inherently takes longer because there's a lot more stuff going on. But on the other hand, your tests are running in a more realistic environment where you might not need to bother to mock out all the stuff. So if you're like a testing purist, you would prefer the first mode because you want to make sure that your tests are running as fast as possible and with as few dependencies as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But if you just want to load up your app and run some code in there to make sure that the variables are correct, then full app test mode is what you're looking for. And I think it more closely simulates what you were getting with velocity tests, as far as I understand. Because in velocity tests, it would run your entire app and then it would inject some extra code and then run the extra code.
Yeah.
That's right.
But we're not going to be firing up a mirror, and we're going to be working with our actual database. Okay.
Well, when you say your actual no, there is a special test database.
Oh, okay.
Is that what you mean?
Yes. Yeah. Okay, good.
Yeah, what I mean is that Mongo itself, the program called Mongo, is starting.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
And you can imagine a version of simple test mode where we never even start that. There's no database present at all.
Yeah. Probably we should move in that direction. I mean, to make that feasible, we need better mocks for Mongo.
I think there's one thing that's also really important to mention on the testing. I don't know if we were going to get to this, is I think it's really easy to get bogged down in different testing modes and what code is loaded and what that looks like and all that stuff. But I think at the end of the day, from my point of view, as somebody who's not a testing enthusiast, right, I like to write the exact amount of tests that will cause my code to not break and not more. At the end of the day, what this means to me is I would like to have a pattern that I can copy and paste to A, test a method, B, test a publication, C, test a template, test a route, test a collection helper. At the end of the day, I personally don't care how those tests are being run or where or what things are loaded. I just want some code that I can put in my app that will tell me that my method is executing correctly. And I think that's really the goal here. The goal is to have a testing guide there you can copy and paste some tests and then you will have tests. And that's pretty much the main goal in my opinion, versus trying to have all the different modes that you might want to do lots of different abstract things.
Yeah. This seems like it's going to be pretty smooth for continuous integration and how you guys are working with it. Very cool. So for end to end, people are still going to use Chimp?
They will if they follow the guide, just because that's what we'll recommend in the guide. And Chimp has some nice Meteor-specific features, it can listen to your app and notice when it reloads a new version and rerun the tests and stuff.
Right.
But there's nothing tying the framework to Chimp.
Right.
Certainly, I know that other end-to-end testing tools will work just great with it. Yeah.
Very cool. What does this mean like for the future of TinyTest?
Good question. I think it means TinyTest is like officially over. I mean, we're still using TinyTest for a lot of the tests, the tests that we have written in the Meteor tool. We're not going to go and rewrite them all. And I guess people will also have package tests written in TinyTest.
Right.
So whether or not people want to convert them to module tests and try and get TinyTest working in this new test mode, I don't know. We'll see. I kind of doubt it. But yeah, and we now recommend Mocha, but that's not the only option. It's just, again, we need to pick something.
Right.
And it's just better supported by the world.
Yeah.
TinyTest is a historical oddity that it even exists.
Yeah, I think I've seen some interesting projects of people building the TinyTest syntax on top of Mocha. So there might be some hacks that you could apply to make your existing tests written in TinyTest work on top of Mocha so that you can incrementally transition from one to the other. But that would definitely be my recommendation. Like, if you hire a JavaScript developer today, they are not going to know TinyTest. They're probably going to know Mocha.
Look, I think technically it would be quite easy to get the test in browser package, which is the TinyTest package test runner, working with 1.3's new mode. And if someone wants to do that, like, great, they should. But it doesn't seem like the most forward-looking.
I'm curious, like, how you guys would define driver packages and describing like the Avatar Mocha package that's out.
Yeah, so the Avatar Mocha package is just a fork of the Practical Meteor Mocha package, just, I guess, while we wait for a couple of pull requests to get merged there. We don't anticipate people will be using it. I'll be using the Practical Meteor one because, like I kind of mentioned with the package testing, this package has been doing basically the same thing as what we're talking about, for a while now, and it's sort of like a leading package, I guess, in this style of testing. A driver package has sort of two jobs. The first job is to, I guess, bring the test framework into the app. So the Practical Meteor Mocha package, as an example, brings Mocha in and enables test files to call describe and it, which is the like Mocha syntax. So I guess you can think of that as like provide an API for the test to register themselves. And then the second thing it needs to do is set up the reporter app. So this little mini app which displays the results of test runs. Now there's two ways that it can do that. One is in a browser with a UI, which is, a development test mode. And the second way is on the command line, and it's still the command line in a browser, so it's still console.logging. But the intention there is that it would get driven by a tool like SpaceJam. And so what SpaceJam is simply a little Phantom script that it's a little node package that runs a Phantom script that runs your tests in a Phantom browser, reads the results of the console logging, and checks to see if your tests have passed. And so it's used for things like CI and command line testing.
Very cool. Very cool. Does this need to be like an Atmosphere package? These
Does it
packages?
run package? At this point in time, yep.
Okay.
Are you thinking, could they be an NPM package? Is that the question?
Yeah, because like the 1.3 guide, the upgrade guide's coming out, and even right in there it says whenever possible, make an NPM package.
That's true. Could they be an NPM package? Well, they just need to export a symbol called run tests. So in that sense they could, but then they also have to have this mini Meteor app inside them, and I don't think we really have a way right now of an NPM package like doing different things on the client and server, and depending on Blaze, for instance, you might want to use Blaze to do the UI. I think technically it might be possible, but it might be like a little difficult in this case.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool.
But maybe for one of the console ones, you could do it. Yeah, I think maybe you could do it.
Yeah, I think for now, Atmosphere packages are the best place to put things that are kind of like deeply integrated. And I think this test runner thing would be a pretty good example of something that's relatively integrated into the whole Meteor stack and build process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Bringing in Mocha from NPM, that would be a good idea.
Yeah. Very cool. I think that's a little tip for something that clarifying like the boundary between NPM and Atmosphere for the guide.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So these driver packages, are you guys going to depend on the community to just like roll these things out, and you guys like got the Mocha one rolling, which is pretty much practical Meteor Mocha, or are you guys going to like make a handful of the popular ones?
No, we're definitely going to depend on the community for this. Hopefully that's okay.
Absolutely. It's
yeah.
yeah.
We have the practical Meteor Mocha one, which may have been released by now or will be soon, I think. I know that Sanjo is, Jonas is working on a Jasmine one, pulling over the stuff he's done for Velocity. And I'm not sure are there any other plans from anyone else, but I think that we'll see them appear hopefully really soon. I mean, I only made a post explaining how to do it, a few days ago. So it's all very new.
People love Cucumber, so I'm pretty sure we're going to be seeing that.
Oh, there you go.
Or they're going to be coming to burn down your guys' doors or something like that. But
well, Cucumber could run in Chimp, right? Cucumber is the acceptance testing language.
Yep, you can write Cucumber tests in Chimp and point it at Meteor. Not a problem.
Yeah. Interesting.
In fact, we've done that. Although I don't think we'll include it in the guide because there's a lot of details around Cucumber that just aren't specific to Meteor.
Well, let's talk about then. So where exactly do you see the community kind of stepping in and really helping out? So like driver packages is a big yes for that.
Definitely. Well, not only that. So the driver package thing I can see being like, a little burst of effort around now that hopefully they'll just like be converted and it'll be all good, within a few weeks or months maybe. I don't know how many test frameworks there are for JavaScript. Maybe there are a lot, but hopefully it'll be pretty easy for people. It's sort of like a one-person job anyway to make a driver package and then everyone gets to use it. It's great. It's perfect open source.
Yeah.
The other area that I think we're lacking right now in Meteor in terms of testing tools is sort of mocking and stubbing tools for the framework. So there are a few things that came out of the Velocity project, but the Velocity project wasn't really focused so much on this. I think there was a lot of energy put into the whole mirrors thing. And this is something that we've done a few sketches, I guess, in the example app and in the guide article on testing, where we're like, oh, this is like a sketch of how you could test a publication. And what we're hoping is that someone will be like, this is cool. They haven't published this package yet on Atmosphere. I could just take this code, paste it into a package and call it like Ben, publication tester and get all the credit for it. And obviously take on the maintenance burden. But that's kind of what we're hoping for, because at the end of the day, we can't really spend a lot of time, and maintaining a package is work. As I think we all know, it's it has pros and cons, and one of the pros is the recognition, and one of the cons is that people use stuff, and so you got to make sure it keeps working. So it's hard for us to sort of publish a whole lot of mocking tools and stuff for all the different parts of the stack. If we'd been focused on testing, making testing easy from the beginning, perhaps we would have built all these things as we went. And maybe if I could rewrite history, I would make that happen, but that didn't happen. I think this is a great opportunity, for anyone who's out there looking for some way to make their mark in the media community. What package should I build? How can I help? If you wrote a package that made it easy to test methods, and mock out all their dependencies, every single app would use it. and you can imagine what the benefits of that are, compared to some of the other like things that you could build that I think, maybe a small percentage of apps would use. I think you'll find
Absolutely.
these testing utilities, like everyone is going to want to use it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I would also add that I think there needs to just be a lot more tutorials and blogs and just the conversation around testing and strategies and educating people.
Totally.
Yeah. So,
and I think hopefully the guy can also help with that. So, where we'll have like, oh, here's our sketch of, how to test a publication. And to some degree, the text will have to be a sketch as well, because it's, it can't be that long. And someone else who's more content, driven member of the community can definitely look at that and be like, oh, this could be like, there could be so much more detail there. And like, let's write like a blog post where I build like a publication test from the scratch and do it step by step. And, and we'd love to link to that kind of material.
Yeah. Because that helps everyone level up and then also get a different perspective and also possibly identify pretty major pain points that can be
totally.
Yeah, and I think a big thing in terms of just changing the reputation of Meteor is just when people build example apps or they build tutorials or they build, big open source projects, putting testing as a priority, I think will go a long way towards, right now when people see a Meteor app, they're like, oh, like, yeah, but is it really production ready? Because like there's not really that many tests and whatever. But like if you release an open source project or an example app and you have like bulletproof test coverage, that really just gives people a great resource to follow. It also gives people a great a great boost to the reputation to see like, wow, like you can build a Meteor app that is super well tested, and that's good engineering, Yeah, and that's good for production apps.
Absolutely. 1.3 is a massive release. It really is.
Yeah,
have you guys ever thought like this is too much?
Yes.
Yes. That's why we have a project manager now.
Okay, so saying that, going forward, when you guys are going to be doing your minor releases, like, are they going to be like smaller in scope, faster in velocity, getting out? Like, is that kind of?
Yeah, we hope so.
1.3 lays a really good foundation to allow that to happen. Like you guys are making some major changes that really like kind of open up the future more.
Yeah, we haven't like nailed down all the details yet. We've been sort of focused on 1.3, but we do want to try and get like a much higher release cadence. We talked about every month. And part of the motivation for that is now that we're splitting things like plays and accounts out into sort of more community maintained packages, it's really going to be frustrating for those community packages if they have to wait 6 months to do releases. Not that it's not frustrating already internally to have to wait 6 months to see some bug fix go out, non-critical bug fix, or minor feature that like is super useful. So yeah, I mean, one way that we're considering doing that is like just saying to do like an Ubuntu style, like we're just gonna do a release like on this date, no matter what. It may be a bad idea. We're still debating it, but I would expect to see like the next release 1.4 or 1.3.1 or whatever it is to be a lot less than 6 months away.
Very cool.
But
I say go for it.
You're probably going to hang those words around my neck in 6 months' time. Where's the release, Tom? You said it was going to be out.
No, I am going to use it as an opportunity for another show, but I won't be too hard on you.
No, I think Tom really hit it on the head. Like, as soon as we have more accountability to like serious external contributors to some of the stuff that would normally have come out in a Meteor release, that's when, if we're working with Meteor to improve Blaze, or we're working with some people like Rocket Chat to improve accounts, they're not going to want to wait 5 months to release their code. They're going to give up and, fork it or something. So we want to make sure that, we become more externally accountable to like deliver stuff on a regular schedule. At least that's how I feel about it.
Very cool. All right, guys. Is there any stone that we didn't overturn yet that you guys want to like kind of touch on before we we end this show?
No, not without diving into details again. No, I think it's good.
Yeah, I think like
Stay away from those weeds.
Yeah. We don't have the time for the weeds.
No.
Everyone in the forum, if you're listening to the audio part of this, jump on the forums if you want to like share your opinion if we should have jumped in the weeds, and we'll gladly have another show. And if you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and just like post a comment on there and let us know what you think. And if we need another show, then we'll totally do it. Tom, are you up for coming on the show again?
Yes.
Awesome. Very cool. All right. Well, as always, guys, I want to thank our guest, Tom. I want to thank Sasha for lining this up. Sasha. Sorry. Sasha. Oh, man. Usually it's the other way around. Usually I call Sasha Sashko. So you got hit this time. Sorry, man.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
Sorry, dude.
No, man, I'm so hyped for 1.3. It's gonna be insane. Like, wow.
Totally. Like
I thought this stuff was gonna take years. We were like, oh yeah, we're gonna build NPM and testing and like whatever, and like it's done. It's like, wow, how did that even happen?
Yeah. I finally see the current marketing message, which is Meteor is built for professional developers. I see that message finally being legit with 1.3. And that's what's really neat, because now the code base matches the message. On top of that, the documentation is there. And so you could tell like, okay, there's a very professional image upheld and going forward. And so that's what really has me excited, where it's been 4 years and yet I feel like we're just on the launching pad still. And it's just about to take off. Galaxy is out there. It's proven. It's running. It's good. Yeah, I really think like we're just at the beginning still. So, and that is what has me like really excited.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is we've really learned a lot from those previous years, and we're still learning about how to do this stuff better.
And it's exciting to see like where the JavaScript world went. 4 years ago it was totally different, and now it's at a different point.
Yeah.
All right, all. Well, this is the end of transmission 9. So go out and build amazing things with Meteor.
Do it.
Do it. This show is sponsored by Meteor Galaxy Hosting, a containerized cloud service specifically designed and engineered for Meteor app deployment. Learn more at meteor.com/galaxy. This show is also sponsored by OKGrow, an official Meteor consulting partner building full stack web and mobile apps. Learn more at okgrow.com.